Thanks, Katja. So we were looking at Kandinsky, right?
Huh?
And George sent me this a good book to look up. I haven't bought the book yet, George, but thank you for that. Looks very interesting. And you remember we sort of basically went through the different ways that Kandinsky sort of thought about his work, sort of what he thought of as being improvisations, sort of these things, and sort of more direct responses to his feelings about the external world, which were even quicker. But what we looked at were his compositions. So he made 10 compositions. So last week we sort of had a bit of a dive into his compositions. The first week we looked at a lot of his ideas, where they were coming from. His, at the time, artists were responding against the materialism of the 19th century and the soullessness of art in general, and trying to find ways to rectify that in their artwork. And then last week we sort of looked at his first 7 compositions, which he made up until sort of 1913. And then the First World War broke out, and he was in Munich before that. And then he got out of there, and he basically went to Switzerland, and then he went to Moscow. And so this is the first of the compositions that he made after he went to Moscow. And so something different happened, because up until composition 7, a lot of the influences in his work were basically thinking about how he, you could put it very simply, but how he could get the spiritual back into artwork. So how he could get his soul back into artwork. And to do that, he looked at lots of different things, from the Fauves to the Impressionists. He got interested in theosophy, and there were lots of in folk art, and there were lots of commonalities that artists were all diving into deeply to hopefully gain access for them to these deeper things, Russian myth and all of that stuff. He tried on. None of those hats really fitted, and it really, his work culminated with his painting. And these are big paintings. This is 3 meters wide. So this is 10 feet wide, 11 feet wide, 10 feet wide. Says it right there. So, and, no one liked them at the time, of course, which I think we talked about last week. Except one person liked this one, which was his friend. And, but then when he moved to Moscow, he moved to Moscow in 1914. And shortly after that, you remember there was in 1917, was the revolutions happened in Moscow, so in Russia. So the artists were, or the avant-garde artists were basically part of that revolutionary thought and channeling that revolutionary thinking and trying to come up with ways. And they were sort of encouraged by the politicians too. They were basically trying to think up of ways to make imagery that the proletariat or the common man and woman could relate to. And so, they approached it in some ways by making forms that were more mechanical. So was one way, trying to make shapes and forms that came from industry, which was what most people were working in now. And they also were thinking about higher ideals as well. So they started thinking about floating forms in just ambiguous spaces. Kandinsky, this is composition 8, was very affected by that thinking. So up until composition 7, a lot of his thinking's coming from his own delving into stuff And now his thinking takes a radical shift. And he abandons a lot of the way he was thinking before, because now he's been influenced by all the avant-garde painters in Moscow. And this is composition 9. And we're going to sort of look a little closer at all this now. This he painted in 1936 after he moved to Paris. And then composition 10, which he painted in 1939. So let's go back a bit. This is Rodochenko. This is one of the artists that sort of was working in Moscow. Malevich, Tatlin, Rodochenko, a number of artists were all working there. Popova, Lyubov Popova. So these are a few Rodochenko paintings. And the circle was a big factor for the thinking going on at the time. Like simple geometric forms were starting to be thought of in terms of their potential and what they implied in terms of elevated thought or elevated conditions. And the circle was almost the most pure of the forms. It was a symbol of sort of inner force. And so there was lots of efforts made and lots of thinking involved in, what color should this circle be? And so, different colors there's lots of theories. Like you can get really lost in all this. It's sort of fun. But thinking involved in what was the dark colors seem to be more together with the shape of the circle. They seem to do something that was in line with what people were thinking about. This is another Rodochenko painting. Who's seen this painting?
I haven't.
Has anyone seen it?
I haven't.
Because I first saw this at the MoMA, I think a couple of years back. It just appeared.
Is that the one you showed last week, or was it a similar one?
I've shown this before. Yeah, like I think, it seems like years ago, but probably a few months back.
Oh, I thought last week. Okay.
Maybe I showed it last week, did I?
Well, I think it was one that was very similar, because you were talking about red and black and white, and then there was sort of a secondary gray and something else that was behind the stronger red and black. But it was, triangle shapes, and it was similar.
Yeah, it must be similar. Maybe it's that one.
I don't think we saw the pink that last one. I don't think we saw it.
No.
It's similar, right?
Those are the last 2 weeks there, Judy. So I just scrolled through.
All
But
right.
I think I sort of became a little bit of a fan of her a few years back when it sort of appeared at MoMA, and I hadn't seen it before. It's a good sized painting, and it dominates the wall, and I was very excited to see it. It's a really good painting. Lyubov Popova, Liubov Popova. She died when she was like 25 years old or something. No, 35 she was when she died, really young. But everyone knew she was really good. And so they I think they had a big show with 77 of her paintings in it when she died, and all sorts of other stuff. Like she was into all sorts of things, really creative personality. And so I thought we'd look at a few tonight.
Peter, what was the one that was like a black and white one with like a figure, a baby, or a figure in the center? I think it's back a little bit, but I'm not sure you talked about it at all. No, I don't want to interrupt if you're on the train, but there was, right in the beginning, you showed a black and white with a kind of like a baby or a figure in the center. I think it's back further, but that's okay.
That's it. That's where I started. Can you see it on the side?
Yeah. No, it's previous, I think. Maybe you made a mistake and you just,
Yeah, that's where I started tonight.
Yeah, but you didn't.
I
But
think I think you saw a baby in this one then maybe.
no, I know what I'm talking
Huh?
about. No, it's okay. It's further back, that's all.
Back
Maybe,
here somewhere?
yeah, like maybe you didn't mean to, but there's a black and white one with like a figure right in the center.
These were from the previous couple of weeks. That
Right.
one?
No, black and white drawing, baby in the middle. There, no, a little further maybe.
That one?
Yeah,
Baby?
I don't know, baby figure. Is this one that's in color and this is just a black and white print,
So
or?
this is composition 1,
Okay,
and this was destroyed, so there's no color image of it at all. It got destroyed in the war, I think. So the first 3 compositions all got destroyed. So there's only, you know, black and white, you know, there's nothing in existence. So it's not until the later couple that you
Okay.
start that we still have them.
thank you.
That's okay. So I was going a bit crazy there. Anyway, so these are Lubov's paintings. Sorry. And these are Malevich. And he actually did this. He wrote the titles in like this with bits of card and stuff, which I sort of think's awesome, an awesome way to hang a show. And so he wasn't pursuing the circle, he was pursuing the square as being the higher ideal. And infinite variations on that, obviously. You know, maybe Rauschenberg just saw this photo and decided to put this chair, you know, a few of these things a bit closer together. And
Peter, do you know why he has this? He has the black square in that corner.
so tell me, Katja.
Well, because this is where usually, Russian icons are placed in the house.
Oh, I see, in the top corner, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what he thought of his paintings, right? It was like an icon. So this is the square.
Or anti-icon.
Yeah.
The
That's
anti-icon.
Yeah.
And this is the square. 2 images of the square that I found online. Like, you know, it's hard to know exactly, is it that black or is it this, you know, is this
blue.
It's not blue, I think it's black, but
Oh, blue black.
yeah.
They're not prints, are they? With foul bite?
Are they what?
They're not prints with foul bite. They're paintings, right?
They're paintings, yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, it's interesting because the color, I mean, they're black. It's a black painting, but the color he put over when he made that, you know, obviously there was other stuff going on underneath, and then he turned into a black square. And he did it incorrectly in terms of how one would do a painting to make it archival. So in the heat of the moment, that's what he made. But he also made a white square. And when he left, I think he took them with him to Germany, and then he left Germany, and they basically got stored and put in someone's apartment and the museum and whatnot. And then they sort of got lent to someone in Manhattan, and then the museum and whatnot ended up with this in their collection somehow years later. But no one wanted it for years, these paintings.
His name is Malevich.
Yeah. This is done a little bit later, 1919. This is Suprematist composition. So I thought I'd put a few of his suprematist compositions in the just so we can talk about it, but he started introducing geometry and lines to sort of counter the forces that the bigger shapes were developing, but all done in this sort of very amorphous, ambiguous, lofty space. And the theory was that they wanted to lift it up from the sort of the everyday, the grounding of the gravity, to release these forms from gravity in a sense. And to sort of remove the third dimension in doing so. So to float these forms in space and to remove the modeling from the edge of, because normally if we were making a form, right, if we wanted this to be a form, this shape of yellow ochre, we would have a side plane, we'd turn it into a cube. So we just do that. Right? And then we just change the temperature on the side plane. So that we have warm and then cool, and then the form pops. So all you have to do is change temperature, and then you create a form. And so that they were working against that. They didn't want to basically have these big forms in space anymore. They wanted to remove the third dimension, which is this side plane that we just had, and to flatten the forms and let them sort of feel like they're sort of floating in this indiscriminate way in this undefined space, this undefinable space. And what that did is it sort of created a different relationship with the picture plane. So it's sort of hard to pick where these things are in relation to themselves in the picture plane. So it's hard to know where that blue is in relation to the yellow ochre. It's easier to see what the organization when they're overlapping. But even this red, it's hard to tell exactly where it is. And so Kandinsky, you know, his thinking was that the plane, the new plane had to exist in front of the physical plane of the painting. So that really came from the supremacists, to thinking of the supremacists.
Can I ask a question about what you just said?
Yeah,
About what the last painting? Can we just go back to the last one?
yeah,
Now, I understand what you're saying about these forms not understanding the relationship to the other ones, especially when they're not overlapping. But doesn't that sort of challenge what we know about color theory, in that warm forms tend to pop off the page? In this case, I'm having a hard time figuring. I mean, I think I'm just questioning how color theory fits into what you said about them being in an ambiguous space.
yeah. Like I don't think that warm forms generally pop off the painting. Like I think once each shape is related, then it's possible to get a red shape that's warm sitting back in space and a cool shape coming forward. If you just put everything down and then not related, then it's going to be incoherent anyway. So they'll just end up being where they're going to be. But in terms of does it challenge color theory? I think it's still relational, because I think the placement is still being carefully considered, but it's just not being considered in the way that, say, Kandinsky was thinking of placing things. If you go right back to these, where he's got these warm colors sitting right back in space and the cool colors coming forward. You know, so it's more to do, it's not being organized and related in this way where the thinking comes from the real world. It's in accordance with some other set of rules. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, sometimes and you're right, I mean, you're right. I mean, I'm challenged with color theory and I'm always, I'm trying to figure it out and,
Yeah, I think everyone is, Doris. Like colors is difficult, you know, and I don't think anyone finds color easy. And ultimately, everyone's got to sort of work out their own relationship with color. So Kandinsky, for example, just basically rejected color because he focused on drawing and he pretty much just used temperature, you know, and very subtle hues. Sorry, Giacometti. Did I say Giacometti then?
No.
Or Kandinsky? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Just it must be because it's the 1st of April that everyone's going a bit nutty tonight. Anyway, Giacometti just rejected color, and that was his way of not dealing with it. You know, so he didn't take on this idea of intense color. And I don't think it makes sense to sort of, you know, I don't think it makes sense for me to say, here's my set of principles or rules around color, and then everyone sort of then follow those rules, because ultimately you're a different artist and you've got to come up with your own relationship with color. Like some teachers do that, they sort of have this way, and I think everyone has to come up with their own way of dealing with color, but it doesn't make sense to sort of pass that on as some sort of workable system as such. So even thinking that warms come cool and come forward and cools recede, you know, certainly if I was painting a landscape and I wanted to make the space recede, then there's going to be certain ways that I can think about that. But even if I want to put a beautiful red warm color back in space, I'm going to be able to do that. This is a study that Kandinsky did for composition 8. And so you can see he's thinking of the circle, the circle's intention with these geometric marks that are coming in. And really interesting how he's sort of notating some of the spaces between and what he's doing to that, how he's bringing in cool reds, cool blues, how they're engaging edges or forming edges or making edges. He's articulating, like that comes way forward, doesn't it? Relates to that. And everything else is supporting it. So he's thinking through a bunch of ideas. There's not many studies left for these last 3 paintings for some reason. And this was the final composition 8. So, you know, that is very strong. These circles in the top left-hand corner. So he's had to find all these different ways to counter that. This painting he made, so, you know, he was in Russia earlier on, and then he basically moved back to Germany between the wars and worked at the Bauhaus. And so when he was at the Bauhaus, a whole bunch of other artists were there, and they're all basically thinking about the same stuff, similar stuff, color theory, and you can get lots of books on this, Doris, if you want. Like Paul Klee and Kandinsky himself wrote, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 essays and a couple of different books. And many people wrote, you know, there was the music theory, don't forget, on discordance and breaking the ideas of melody and harmony. So there are all these ideas about which affected the decisions and the organizations that were going in to the painting. You know, normally this wouldn't appear with that, for example. You know, this was pretty radical, doing, you know, putting all these contradictory ideas into the one painting. But you'll notice the big difference, like this is very cool. Let's jump back. Compare that to that. So this is chaotic and full of emotion and lots of movement, lots of contradictory ideas, full of all sorts of subliminal readings and stuff. And then this is much quieter, much more peaceful, much cooler, much more organized. So massive big change in his work. So this was painted right before he left the Bauhaus, when the Nazis came to power. And so he sort of, I think this is one of the last paintings he made before he went to Paris. Did anyone see this painting in the Moreau show a few years back?
No.
Yes.
You saw this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a Moreau. I hadn't seen it before that show. A blurry image of a Moreau, should I say. It's like an old shoe in there somewhere. Done from 37. So when Kandinsky moved to Paris, he basically lived on the outskirts of Paris, and I think he was 70 by that time. So he basically, but he, you know, he befriended, or he knew of, or already knew the main artists in Paris. And so the avant-garde art centers were either in Moscow or Munich or Berlin or Paris at that time, or even in Amsterdam. And so, you know, and there weren't that many. Like now there's sort of more avant-garde artists on 8th Street in Manhattan than there probably were in each of those areas. So sort of everyone knew each other. But you remember at the time, Surrealism was happening in Paris. And so he basically got influenced by Surrealism. So this is another Moreau painting, The Two Philosophers.
Huh.
Pretty cool, right?
Well, it's not my favorite kind of thing, but it's a little bit like Tanguy, you know, but
Yeah, that's what I thought.
A little bit like who?
Tanguy, Yves Tanguy
Oh, you're right.
was also not a big favorite, but it's interesting though.
They all have a lightness, don't they?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
And maybe that lightness was coming out of the thinking that we've just been talking about. You know, maybe they were responding a bit to Cézanne's heaviness and his weight. There were a bunch of these in that MoMA show too. These are sort of coming out of he did a whole lot of things called constellations. And what struck me, and you know, again, the space is sort of ambiguous in Moreau, but his drawing is just sharp and spot on. And then his shapes are very brilliant and bright with simplified colors.
Euro, that's what
I know, Sarah. I'm thinking Moreau. Who is?
you right.
Sorry, Peter. We're making fun of your accent.
I know.
Euro.
I've been here 20 years. I'm used to it now. When you come to Australia, you'll get the same.
Good.
This is composition number 9. So you can see this is done in 1936. So you can see now his thinking's changing again. It's now he's absorbing the influences of the artists around him again.
Yeah.
Was he in Paris for this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it would make a great scarf.
I've been to the Miro Museum. I missed the MoMA show, but I didn't see anything. I've never seen anything like this.
I think this painting's in the Pompidou Center.
Haven't been there. a bit.
Because the Miro Museum is in Barcelona.
Yes.
So I've never been to the Miro Museum in Barcelona, but I wouldn't imagine they'd have these late paintings like that he did in Paris. This is Jean Arp,
Yeah.
another artist that he was influenced by. So he was influenced by, Yves Tanguy, like you said, and Arp and all the surrealists.
Mm-hmm. I like harp.
Some more Miro.
Funny.
I just put this one in sort of 2 minutes before we started the Zoom thing because I really just liked the ground.
Yeah.
So it was a beautiful ground. Like
Very
this
nice.
one, it looks like a muddy ground to me, but this one just gloriously beautiful ground.
Really nice. Yeah.
And the reds really that he puts on top really talk to that ground.
Right.
In the there's that late Moreau at MoMA. They always have it up. It's a big painting, a big vertical painting, and it's basically just a washy ground with a couple of shapes on it. And it's no one really looks at it for that long, but interesting painting. But I sort of feel like this is a bit more beautiful, and it goes back to his earlier paintings where he was trying to work out who Moreau was. And he was coming out of the Dutch still life painters.
Right. I was just reading a really great article about Bosch, and that reminds me of Bosch.
A little bit, right?
Yeah, with those
Just the intertwining of complex forms.
alchemical shapes.
It doesn't seem to be any, sexual body parts or things or, naughty scenes occurring. Maybe this one's thinking about it, but in relation to this, whatever that is, maybe that's symbolic of something, some body part. So maybe now I'm seeing lots of body parts. Okay, I take it back. It's everywhere. This is another sort of constellation.
It's almost 6:40.
Oh, okay. I'm nearly there. Gotcha. Nice timing.
There.
More of a dialogue between the ground and the drawing, right?
Yeah. That's very interesting.
Which is sort of interesting to think of in terms of our own work, how we begin a work. Like if we look at those three and what that ground did in relation to the drawing marks and then the shapes versus what this ground does in relation to the drawing marks and shapes versus what this one does.
The grounds are like in quadrants.
They're like a what?
Like in quadrants, like the colors kind of
Here, right?
Yeah.
Even here a bit.
Yep.
So he's certainly thinking that way a lot. But this one even more so, where that color, he really sort of embraces that color and says, I'm going to turn that into a body or something. Or a head, that's going to be a head and another body coming around there. And then this is Constellation 10. The last one that he did in 1939, where it becomes, he really starts shifting that ground that we've been talking about and almost blanking it out and such that the color, it just become that black ground now really turns these color shapes into very forceful things in themselves.
What year did he die? And it's
That's a good question.
okay. Don't worry about it.
Who can look it up? Someone look it up real fast.
I'll look it up.
Not long after this, though.
Uh-huh. It was a horrible year, 1939.
1939, yeah.
Horrible.
Well, he sort of saw black as being the end of something. Like,
Well,
so the more you read about this painting and the way he was thinking about black, it almost predicted what was about to follow.
yeah.
And it's interesting just how playful and light this painting feels despite the black. Like it doesn't have the weight of, I mean, this is sort of in a way more somber.
Oh, come on.
He died in 1944,
There you go. Thank you.
December 1944.